So I'd like to welcome you guys here tonight for the Raleigh Astronomy Club's September 2021 meeting. Tonight we're going to have a presentation on by Chris Cole, that's me, about the use of narrowband filters. This just gives you a good rundown of what narrowband imaging is and we call it what's possible with it, the advantages and disadvantages of it, and then finally we'll pretty much just another imaging showcase, but narrowband only of those select images I just gave. So I'll just go over it again. If you have any images to show, particularly of the supernova remnants of the Crescent Nebula or the Veiled Nebula, any narrowband images of the Emission Nebulae, North American Nebula, and the Flaming Star Nebula, and finally, any narrowband images to share of the Dumbbell Nebula and the Ring Nebula. Those are both planetary nebulae, so that we can get a nice little menagerie going of what narrowbands, the kinds of objects narrowband imaging benefits from. So, anyways, all right, so using narrowband filters right here. Before we started the meeting, we got a discussion about this famous Hubble pic right here. This is, of course, the Pillars of Creation. It's a section of the Eagle Nebula, also known as Mystery Object 16, and it's in the constellation of Sagittarius. And this is a narrowband image, meaning that they took individual colors given off by the atoms that are composed of, that the nebula is composed of. So from there, let's see what we got next. Okay. I'm doing this on two computers, so sorry. So where does narrowband, using narrowband filters, where does narrowband light come from? We will cover that. What are the advantages and disadvantages of narrowband imaging? And finally, going over that list that I just mentioned before, we've taken a look at the different objects that people would use narrowband filters to take images of. And so, where does narrowband light come from? Well, simply, light emitted by anything will be unique to the substance that's emitting it. And it depends on what energy state or whatever circumstances that substance is currently in. So light emitted is dependent upon the substance's composition, and the behavior of the substance's movement will determine what kind of behavior electrons have at different energy levels. When an electron moves from an energy level to a lower energy level, it'll emit a photon or a wavelength of color. And so right here, I like this this image right here. I found this on the web when I was looking up images explaining where hydrogen alpha comes from. And hydrogen alpha is a wavelength that's found in the red section of the spectrum, and that's what that little red squiggly line there is. It's from when an electron of hydrogen goes from the level 3 energy down to the lower energy level 2. And you see two others right there, and those, I believe, are the other wavelengths. One of them's hydrogen beta, which I've heard of. The other one, I'm just going to assume it's alpha, beta, gamma, so I'm going to assume that's gamma right there. So anyway, so we're going to use hydrogen as the example here. And when the electron of hydrogen moves from its third to second lowest energy level, a hydrogen alpha photon with a wavelength of 656 nanometers is released. So there's the spectra of all the movement of electrons going from whatever energy level all the way down to energy, or down to the second lowest energy level. So for the H alpha line, that is going from the third energy level, which you saw back here on this slide, and whereas hydrogen beta, I guess it's coming down from the energy level 4 all the way down to energy level 2. There's a term for these sets of photons that come up. I forgot what they're called, what it's called, but it's like anytime you have an electron fall from energy level X down to, in our case, energy level 2, there's a name for it. There's a series that they give for these different movements of electrons down to a defined energy level. So
something like Balmer series.
That sounds about right. Who said that?
Oh, Mike Littleton.
Oh, okay. All right. Very good. Very good. Thank you. Okay, so this next slide, it'll show it, is meant to be a joke, sort of. They're like, oh, okay, Chris, why did you choose such a crappy background for a PowerPoint presentation using white fonts on a very bright background? So basically, this is the biggest benefit of narrowband imaging. Okay, you get to take images of the night sky from areas like this, generally speaking. Okay, obviously direct light is not going to work, but what the hell is this slide saying? So go back to something a little more readable here. What are the advantages and disadvantages of narrowband imaging? Looking back at the last slide, well, actually, to me, there's only one advantage, in my opinion, and it's imaging location. So you don't have to travel very far, just as long as you're in an area where there is no direct light hitting your imaging rig. You don't have to worry about light pollution being a problem so much. You can also image during a few days before and after the new moon. Now, there is some lighting out there, like full spectrum LED lighting, which, as you can see there, full spectrum means that it has all the wavelengths that'll be bombarding your imaging rig if you decide to park close to a light source that's full spectrum. So it's not a foolproof way of imaging the night sky from just about anywhere. I mean, it does have its drawbacks too. So anyway, the biggest disadvantage for me, one thing is I can write about money, is that narrowband filters are really expensive. And it's all dictated by, they're hard to make, and it's all dictated by how specific do they filter out the wavelength that they're advertising. Okay, so they're given in different band passes, and so like for example that you're seeing here on the screen, here's two hydrogen alpha images here. You can see the one on the left is a little more contrasty versus the one on the right. And these are both hydrogen alpha filters, but one has a band pass of 5 nanometers, whereas the other one has a band pass of 7 nanometers. Okay, well, what does that mean exactly? So here, I'm going to go back to one of the other slides here. Okay, there we go. And so remember, this is the light that's emitted by hydrogen when a photon is ejected from an electron coming down to the second energy level. There's here you see hydrogen alpha is being pointed out there. Okay, so the rainbow you see here is the electromagnetic spectrum, right? So one thing that you need to keep in mind here is that when we are photographing wavelengths, we are not photographing a range. It's just a single reading, okay? So the best way that I can describe what the band pass of a narrowband filter, or how well a narrowband filter will work based on its band pass. If you look at the red line there for hydrogen alpha, and let's say that you take the 7 nanometer hydrogen alpha filter, then let's just say that it's centered on 656 nanometers. Well, that also means that because it's a 7 nanometer hydrogen alpha filter, there is going to be 3.5 nanometers worth of light coming in on either side of the hydrogen alpha line, meaning that some of those wavelengths of light that you don't want are going to squeeze their way in and hit the camera sensor, and it's going to be light that's, well, not hydrogen alpha. So whereas if you go down even narrower, like in the comparison that I was just showing you, going down to 5 nanometers, well, that squeezes the bandpass a little closer together, and so that you're targeting the 656 nanometer hydrogen alpha line there. Okay, and the lowest I've ever seen, I'm sure there is, or the narrowest bandpass I have ever seen for just DSO or deep sky imaging, narrowband imaging, is 3. Does anybody know? Is there anything lower than 3? Something well known that's that I'm just not picking up on yet? Anybody? No. Okay. So, but there another kind of narrowband imaging that, based on the background that you can see right now with the solar prominence back there, that does use a filter that is able to go all the way down to angstroms, and angstroms are 1/10 of a nanometer in size. So it's very specific. We have a very tight band pass on hydrogen alpha filters that are used for solar imaging, which is why part of the reason why they are so expensive. So, okay, so when you go back to that right there, one of the more important things that you want to remember also is that you want to make sure that you're using a monocamera to do your narrowband imaging. However, you can get away with some one-shot colors out there that are sensitive in the red section of the spectrum, where hydrogen alpha can be found, and you can do hydrogen alpha imaging with that. Up until recently, that was pretty much the only narrowband imaging that you could do with a color camera. Now they have like dual band pass and like quadra pass filters now, so that you can like take like full-blown color images, one-shot color narrowband images. So that's I think Naveen's been using that quite a bit, and so is John Sadler. But anyway,
hey Chris, it's Doug. Hey, can I just ask a real quick question? Doesn't also like with most color cameras, I mean, you also have that IR cut filter there at on the camera. Wouldn't that also kind of destroy any kind of narrow band pass you're trying to do?
Yeah, well, it also depends. Okay, so that's a good question. That mostly pertains to a DSLR imaging. Most one-shot color cameras that you would buy for doing astrophotography only, and not like consumer cameras that would be used for just regular terrestrial viewing, do not have an IR filter on the front. But the ones that you're talking about, mostly DSLR cameras that a lot of people do use for astrophotography. Yeah, the manufacturer will put an infrared filter over the top of the sensor before they ship it out, and they're not very particular about how much of the red end of the spectrum, because that's where infrared is, that the filter blocks. They just want enough so that the wavelength that that your eyeball is most receptive to gets passed. And so because of that, most IR filters that are put into these DSLR cameras, unfortunately, they do overlap the 656 nanometer red wavelength of hydrogen alpha. So yeah. So to answer your question, an infrared filter camera probably wouldn't do very well with narrowband imaging. I mean, well, probably wouldn't. It would be an absolute nightmare to do it, let's put it that way. So,
yeah.
But what you can do with DSLR cameras, and I'm sure everybody here knows about this too, is that you can also modify them if you want. Now, that that's gone the way of the dodo right now. I don't know of anybody right offhand that modifies DSLR cameras anymore for astrophotography or whatever. Remove the infrared filter that Doug was referring to, and replace it with just clear glass where all wavelengths come through, or a more milder infrared filter that does not cover up to 656 nanometer wavelength of hydrogen alpha. So, yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Doug.
Thank you.
Okay, well, going back to there, got carried away. There are shortcomings with narrowband imaging. Yeah, sure, you can do it in light polluted areas and whatnot, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be able to take images of everything. Okay. Some of the best objects out there that you would want to take images of are based on reflected starlight coming off of dust, and that's primarily what galaxies are and what all reflection nebulae are. So narrowband imaging isn't going to work too well with those. Now, I mean, to an extent, if the lighting source is bright enough, I've been able to pick up a little bit of reflection nebulae in some of my Horsehead hydrogen alpha images, but it's not very much. So yeah, narrowband imaging is not a foolproof way of going around and taking images of absolutely everything that the sky has to offer. So, anyways, next disadvantage, yes, lots of telescope time. So just like even if you're getting into astrophotography for the very first time, well, it's known that astrophotography, especially DSO or specifically deep sky object imaging, requires a lot of telescope time. Now, but one of the things that you have to keep in mind, though, is that kind of, let's see, let me go back to my first slides here. Okay, coming back to this slide right here. One of the things you need to be aware of is that these filters, like what we have right here, hydrogen alpha line, and like I said, I think that that cyan colored one, the next one down, that's hydrogen beta right there. Again, these are just wavelengths. They're just specific points of light on the electromagnetic spectrum. So all you're going to get is just whatever that object is giving off in the wavelength that your narrowband filter will pass. So you can, the way I like to look at it is that what you're seeing at the top, let's just pretend that those bands aren't missing. That's all the light coming in and hitting your sensor if you did not have a narrowband filter in front of it. If you do put a narrowband filter in front of it, well, you just get a trickle of photons. Okay, so it's going to take a while for you to collect all those photons to get a nice image of the object that you're after. So that's one thing to keep in mind, that you're going to end up spending nights at a time at the telescope trying to finish one narrowband image. So right here that I have on the slide right here, this is the Fishhead Nebula. This took 16 hours. It was 8 hours of hydrogen alpha and 4 hours of oxygen 3 and sulfur 2. And so I put this up there just mainly to demonstrate this is what I was able to do in Cary. And I actually don't live too far away from, or used to not live too far away from Doug Lively. And so it was a pretty bright area where I was, but fortunately I was in a townhome that was an end unit, so I could set up the telescope right next to our townhome and didn't have to worry about direct street lights getting in the way. But yeah, what you're seeing right there, I did that from, I guess you could say, downtown Cary. So not too far from Sass where I lived. But anyway,
brighter now.
Probably.
I have to put my truck lid up to basically block the street light from washing over my my scope at night. That's how I block it.
Very good. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Just giving you a rundown of how narrowband imaging works. Okay, and here, because you're taking individual wavelengths, you can denote the wavelength however you want. Okay, so the three most popular wavelengths that people image are the sulfur 2 wavelength, the hydrogen alpha wavelength, and the oxygen 3 wavelength. Okay, now if you remember, don't feel like going all the way back. Remember the electromagnetic spectrum, the shorter wavelengths are more towards the purple side of the spectrum, whereas the longer wavelengths are towards the deep red part of the spectrum. Okay, so notice I'm just using colors here. I'm not talking about infrared or ultraviolet or anything like that, because we're talking about making a color image here. So what some people do is that they, to keep things in perspective as far as like, well, let's go ahead and assign the longest wavelength to be red, the middle one to be green, and the last one to be blue. Okay, so any digital image is going to be broken down to those three channels, red, green, and blue. Okay, so when we do that, we get what's called the Hubble Palette. Let's see. Oh, there we go. And you get something like that right there. Okay, this is an image actually I just finished this weekend, and this is at 630 millimeter. This is in a 630 millimeter telescope. This is the supernova remnant crescent nebula, HEC 6888. And as you can see, you'll see that there's not much in the way of red there. And if you look at the three individual images right there, well, there's pretty much just very sparse amount of sulfur throughout the whole image. The very outline of the actual crescent itself does have a bit of sulfur, but pretty much the rest of it's devoid. There's just little puffs of it here and there. Hydrogen alpha, as you would expect, because hydrogen is the most plentiful element in the universe, is everywhere. So there's plenty of greens there, and you have plenty of green mixing in with the next most plentiful color, which is blue, and that's a sign for oxygen 3. And you mix green with blue, you get cyan or aqua color, which is why you see most of the intensity in the crescent nebula itself, and not with the outline emission nebula that are there. So anyway, so there's that, and the next one that's really popular is called the HOO series, where we don't use sulfur at all. We just use hydrogen as red, and we use oxygen for both the green and the blue. Now, some people, what they'll do is that they'll take their hydrogen alpha and their blue oxygen, and they'll make, they'll blend them together 50-50, 75-25, 25-75, whatever, to make the green channel. Okay, so but what you're seeing right there, that's using hydrogen for the red channel, and then green and blue, they were both put into the or oxygen was put into both the green and blue channels right there. Okay, so let's see, that's pretty much it for the presentation. One of the things that I was trying to get Orion to do was to come out tonight and show us his little, what is it, setup that he's been using to do like sky surveys in narrowband imaging. And I wanted him to give you a rundown of how his grid works, because he has a very unique imaging setup that not many of us have played with or may be even familiar with. And but yeah, fortunately, it's probably like 12 a.m. over there or something like that. So I guess what I'll do is I am going to go and see. Okay, there we go. Does everybody see my Photoshop screen there? Okay, so basically, I'm just going to just give you a rundown of what I just, it's just a regurgitation of everything I just went over. So there's my hydrogen, here's my oxygen, and there's my sulfur. Okay, so here I am with my channels red, green, and blue. So say that we'll do this all live. Let's do that. Have a burnout here. So we control this. But that's our hydrogen, and we're going to make a Hubble palette. So hydrogen will go in as green. And let's go to and for blue. And sulfur. Anyway, another. Okay, and here I've put all the colors together for red, green, and blue. And this is what I get. So more or less, this looks kind of similar to the image I just showed you. This is the final image right here. But one of the things that I do to level things off as far as just a little bit of processing goes on, we'll go too much graphical processing, is I like to lay all channels of the all groups of color laying on top of each other. So I want everything to be of equal intensity, according to their own individual histogram. So just keep it simple and just use levels here. Let's see. All right, so let's do our let's do that. Okay.
Hey, Chris, quick question. Were the exposure times roughly equal for each of your three channels?
Yes, thank you. That's a good question. I don't think, yes, they are. For this answer to that question, yes, they are. These were all 10-minute series. And the sulfur one, as far as total exposure times, it is different. The sulfur one, and it's only different because I messed up on the sulfur series there. My autofocus routine was not working correctly, and so I had to throw out like half of those. So each image, let's see, both the hydrogen and the oxygen are composed of 24 600-second or 24 10-minute exposures, and then the sulfur one is 14 10-minute exposure. So yeah, they're all the same exposure time, but as far as total exposure time collective, sulfur feels short, which is probably why it doesn't look all that great in the first place. Like usually sulfur is kind of a hard, a tough animal to attain. So, any other questions?
No, thanks.
Okay, so let's see. Okay, so that's roughly pretty close to what the image I had just shown was. But another step that other people like to do is they like to add in a luminous channel, which is what you would do most of the time with just a regular RGB broadband, if you will, color image. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lay down a luminous image that I made last night using both the hydrogen alpha and oxygen 3 channels. So we'll put that down as our luminous on top of that. Made it look a little better. There's the intensity and everything. And Another thing I do to change the noise is that because now that we have a luminous layer, and I can go to town to whatever I'm going to do with modifying how the color looks. I don't have to worry about any artifacts coming through here because it's going to not really have anything to do with the contrast of the actual image. So usually what I'll do is I'll just blur this the color information a little bit. And that tends to lower the amount of star noise, in my opinion. So I just like blur it a little bit. This is just using Nelson blur here. You go down too far, you start to lose a little bit of color, as you can see. Anyways, well, that's pretty much the talk right there. So yeah, so there's yourself an SHO image of the Crescent Nebula using the 3 narrowband imaging sets I just had. You go ahead and stop my share here.
Chris?
Yeah, what's up?
Do you do a whole lot of processing on the individual channels before you mix them?
Yeah, the pictures I just showed you, those are processed already. So, all right, here, let me use this right here. The 3 channels that you just saw, like this one, that's the hydrogen, oxygen, and the sulfur. Sulfur one's atrocious, but it always is. So those were already processed before I started using. So, but as far as like anything afterwards, what I just showed you is after I'm done processing the actual channels here, and I go to combine them into a final image, I may do a little bit of tweaking here and there, like I did with the histogram for each of the channels, just to make sure they're laying on top of each other, because I just like to have an equal representation of everything as one. Okay, so but anyway, but then after that, that's pretty much it. That's all the processing I ever do. I mean, I'll probably go in and do like maybe use Fix Insight for get rid of some of these stars a little better, because it is pretty sandpapery looking there. So, I mean, it hurts my eyes a little bit to look at it now that I've been imaging for a while. So
will you usually start off in Fix Insight, go over to Photoshop, and back to Fix Insight again?
I'm sorry, say that again. What?
You usually start off in Fix Insight, go over to Photoshop for the combination and the balancing, and then head back to Fix Insight?
Yeah, whenever I want to do, when I want to do like getting rid of a very starry background like this, yeah, Fix Insight's definitely the way to go there using StarNet. That's what I would go with there. As far as Fix Insight for, I use mostly Fix Insight for a little bit of stretching. Most I get out of Fix Insight. I actually don't really use DVE that much either. But in Fix Insight, that's been mostly my replacement for Deep Sky Stacker as far as stacking and registering. It just does a lot better job, and it's well, come a long way to come to understand Fix Insight a lot better than versus the limitations of Deep Sky Stacker. So yeah,
Gotcha.
You go to Fix Insight, you do all the stacking, the registering there, and then yeah, I bring it over here and stretching over there, and then I bring it over here and I do a little bit of sharpening and overlay the colors just like you just saw it, and voila, that's it. Go back over and get rid of some of the stars, and I'm done.
Very cool.
Any other questions? No? Okay. All right, so that's it with that. Okay, so that's that right there. And so now what I want to do is just like comparing the differences between the different kinds of the three different types of images I mentioned, does anybody have a North American nebula image they'd like to share? Narrowband image?
I do, if you want.
Go for it.
All right, let's try to share here. Okay.
Very beautiful.
Is that showing up at all?
Yeah, looks nicer than mine. So
Let's see. I'm not seeing the screen I'm sharing. I don't know why. But anyway, well, this is the one on the top here is the Cygnus wall in the North American, and this is with three filters, SA and it process SHO, sulfur, hydrogen, oxygen, a couple of years ago now. Pretty much all the pictures I do here with a 135 millimeter lens, the ATIC 460EX, and a 5 nanometer various filters, all Astrodon filters. I'm replacing all those filters with 3 nanometer, but I'm still waiting for them to show up. So anyway, so that's part of North American Nebula. And then this one is HOO for the Boogeyman Nebula and Orion. Again, these were processed a couple of years ago. I can do a better job now, but I just haven't done it. So this is 2 filters. There's not a lot of sulfur in this particular thing, so it's almost no point in doing sulfur. I tried it, but it didn't really do anything. Let's see. Then more North American here. Again, with that same setup, 135 millimeter lens, and ATIC, and 5 nanometer filters. And this is part of the mosaic that I did of the Cygnus and Cassiopeia area. These are probably 3 to 5 minutes exposures, 2 or 3 hours worth of those. This is one night, so one night I just aimed it at that spot and shot that to get the Pelican and the North American and the variety of things that are around it. And then just following along on the other things Chris asked for, here's the flaming star. Now I've reversed these just because sometimes you can see the structures of the gas and whatnot a little bit more easily when they're reversed. And this is just hydrogen alpha 5 nanometer things. Again, typically between 3 and 5 minute exposures over a number of hours. And then the veil, which is another one. Similar setup, similar amount of exposure. I was trying to get the Pickering's triangle and these other things in here on this one because there's so many other structures. And I guess it's Sky and Telescope for Astronomy or something had an article on with Cygnus on the cover that describe all these various little bits here, and which is very interesting to look at. And then I think that's...
Is that just hydrogen alpha alone?
Just hydrogen alpha, but reversed again.
Yeah, okay, all right, just making sure.
And so that's a lot of fun to do, to try to get all these delicate structures that are here on these tails and whatnot. And it does require, this is probably 3 to 4 hours worth of exposures. Sometimes I can go up to 10-minute exposures, and that even brings out more structure. It just all depends on how good my tracking is and guiding and all that is. And then similar to what Arjun has been doing, I've shown this from before. This is the 86 panel mosaic, all hydrogen alpha from Cygnus over to Cassiopeia over here, with all the variety of things in between. And then, so there's North American, and Crescent is here, and let's see, there's the veil, and a lot of the other, the elephant trunk is here, so forth. Then going all the way over to the lobster and the bubble, and all things are in here. So this is probably about 120 hours worth of exposure altogether.
That's really impressive. What's that? I'm drawing a blank here. I should know this guy better. What's that last nebula on the right?
This one, it's some NGC thing. I don't remember the name, 7822 or something like that. I'd have to look it up.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
7822.
It's huge. I mean, the interesting thing about doing these mosaics is to get some idea of what's there in this wider, it's like 45 degrees of the sky. And so, you know, here's the Pac-Man up here and all the others that float around in here. And so to get some idea of the relative sizes of these things, because you usually don't see them, because the crescent down here is this tiny little thing compared to the North American or the Veil. So, you know, you see that the picture you showed it looks like it might be a big thing, but it's really incredibly tiny in the sky. So that was kind of the reason I did this, was just to get some idea of the relative sizes of all these things when you're looking at them. So, but this was, what, maybe, I don't know, 80 nights or something like that over several months put together. So it's, you know, it's a fun thing to do. It just takes a lot of effort. I have a lot of spirit. That particular time a year ago, I had a lot of clear skies, and so you could do this kind of thing. These are all done from my driveway here in Durham. So with exactly the same setup, 135 millimeter lens and ATIC 460. I have the ASI, 2600 monochrome now, which would be a little bit wider field on these different images. But I'm still waiting for my 3 nanometer filters for that, because I have to have much larger size filters. Then these were all 1.25" filters with the ATIC, but the ASI requires 36 millimeter filters, and I haven't gotten those yet. They're still waiting on COVID settling down and getting shipped and whatnot.
600 is not a full frame, is it? It's not a full frame, is
It's APS-C.
Oh, okay, all right.
6200 is full frame. That's what Arjun has.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I got the numbers split. All right.
He's been using that one, but 2600. It took me 6 months to get to 2600. Just so, you know, and I'm still waiting for the filters. It's very frustrating, actually. So anyway, but that's the kind of narrowband stuff I've been doing the last couple of years, and more or less the things you asked for.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I've got.
Those 180 nights bring up a interesting thing. How much do you have to worry about the full moon when you're doing narrowband? Can you image under a full moon? Or?
Some of them were full moon because of the position of this in the sky. The moon didn't make a lot of difference in hydrogen alpha. If I was trying to do it, I tried to do oxygen on this one down here, because there's this nice squid structure inside here that's only really oxygen. And I sat on that for like 20 hours and I got almost nothing. And you really do need to do that on a no moon night, and do a lot of, and those were 10-minute exposures, which is about the max I can do on the mount I've got. And so it's really a huge amount of effort to do that kind of thing. It's very rewarding if you can do it, but it's very hard.
Jim, I will comment on that, because where I live is a little bit like Steve. It's not possible for me to do LRGB from my house, so it's almost all narrowband. My experience, full moon nights, I mean, yeah, you can image with hydrogen alpha. You should expect about 1/3 the signal to noise, but it also depends on how close you are to the moon. If you're 45 degrees away from the moon, yeah, it's still not going to give you the same signal to noise ratio as a moonless night. The other thing about being, what do you think, Steve? Maybe within 20 degrees of the moon, you're going to fight some gradients when you're processing it.
Yes.
If you're just trying to take a casual snapshot, then, you know, who cares? But if it's something that you put a lot of investment into, especially if you've, with narrowband, my sarcastic comment earlier about, you know, planning on at least a week or more for this, there's some truth to that. And so if you stack a bunch of different nights where the moon was close enough to give you a gradient, and you stack all of those into a single master, you'll have some really weird gradients that you're trying to get rid of. It won't be a consistent actual gradient. It'll be blotches and other things like that. So one comment about this, if you are imaging in hydrogen alpha, and you're fighting, you're around the moon just because of the availability of clear nights and all that kind of stuff, you might want to consider stacking each individual night separately and then combining those into a single stack, because at least the gradients will be simple gradients for each night that you're stacking these up, and you can use the gradient removal tools in PixInsight and other, I think there's some plugins for Photoshop to do that. So you don't wind up with some very complex gradient that's a bear to remove.
I wonder if that normalized scale gradient tool would help any with that.
I'm sorry, say that again?
They have that new script in PixInsight to normalize the scale gradient. I wonder if it would help with any of that.
I haven't messed with it, so I can't comment.
Yeah, so I mean that's a good point as far as the moon goes. Like for example, the image that I just showed you with what do you call it, with the Crescent Nebula, both the oxygen and sulfur were taken last weekend, which we all know that the moon was starting to make itself known at that time. And so sulfur was the last one that was done. And what I had to do with that, just to keep things sane, because I did not want to have to deal with the gradient, is that the way I look at it is that if I'm about somewhere between 45 to 90 degrees, if the object I'm photographing, let's put it that way, is at least 45 to 90 degrees away from the moon, I consider it, quote, doable when the moon is about 15 degrees or less above the horizon. So usually like on a night like that, like what was that, the 12th? Yeah, 12th, last Sunday. The night of the 12th, when I was taking a picture of the Crescent Nebula, I waited until the moon was, I think it was like 12 degrees above the horizon. So whatever it takes to get rid of that moon in there, because it doesn't matter if you like try to put like a tree between you and the moon, or even a building between you and the moon, between the telescope and the moon, it's still going to affect, really cause problems. So especially for oxygen. In fact, that's something that for everybody who's still here, that's one thing that I would highly recommend everybody want to do. If they want, well, let me back up. If you're serious about imaging something completely all the way through, sulfur, hydrogen, and oxygen, I actually would recommend you start with oxygen first. Pick the best nights. Pick the best nights for oxygen. Okay, so that the other ones can just fall to the wayside a little bit. You can get away with down with the moon. So that's just my 2 cents, and that's what I do. So let's see. Okay, so all right. Thanks for those selections, Steve. Does anybody else have any other narrowband images they want to show us?
Yeah, Chris, I've got a few I can show if you want.
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
All right. Let's see here. Well, this is going to be interesting because I haven't done this before. Let's see what happens. Okay. You asked for the flaming star, so this is a little bit of a blow up. Part of the reason that I'm showing this, I do have color versions of this, but I don't want to bore everybody with 20 images. But if there really was somebody out here that is not is a beginner at this, what I was going to show is that you can get some fairly nice stuff just with a hydrogen alpha filter. And based on Steve's comment about having to wait 6 months for a filter, it may be that, I guess my point is, if you're just starting out with us and you get a hydrogen alpha filter, don't feel like you can take nothing and get anything until you wind up with an oxygen or a sulfur. One other thing about this particular image, this was taken in the fall of 2016. And I got back into astronomy, period, the summer of 2016. So this was with a pretty crappy hydrogen alpha filter. Gosh, I'm blanking here on who it was from. I think it was an Optolong. But nevertheless, you can still get an image, especially if you're a beginner, that you might be happy with. And like I said, that's the Flaming Star, just monochrome hydrogen alpha. Oops, sorry. It wants me to save something because I zoomed it and it's being a bear. All right. Hang on, guys. Sorry. All right, this is the tadpoles. And Steve, I think you showed this, but it was actually at a wider angle. But again, this is an instance of what you can get with a hydrogen alpha alone. And I apologize, I tried to invert it like Steve, because that was actually fairly impressive. But if I do that, I just wind up with a white screen. But this is a fairly bright target and would be a good beginner target, especially if you're just doing hydrogen alpha. This was taken in, again, this was with an Optolong filter in 2017, early 2017, I believe. And because this target is fairly bright, and this, if anybody's taking notes, and is actually a beginner, it's IC410. This is something that you actually can get a decent hydrogen alpha image with maybe 4 hours of data. So that was that. And you asked for Cygnus here, the Crescent Nebula. This is a wider field, but not nearly as wide as Steve's view. This actually was taken with a better filter. This was a botter. So you get a little more contrast. So that's kind of what you're paying for, as well as potentially the absence of optical artifacts. And is anybody here actually a beginner at this? No, okay. Well, okay, Doug, I'll just say this. Like everything else, it's a get what you pay for. And the Optolong and the second generation ZWO filters tend to be kind of your entry level. And there was something that somebody quoted. I'm a woodworker, and this particular person that I'm quoting is a violin maker, and he said, as you go along in this, you care more and more about less and less. And there's something to be said for that when it comes to especially narrowband imaging. You'll get something that, you know, you can actually print out and put on the wall with Optolong or ZWO filters. And as you continue to take more data and process things, then smaller things that especially a layperson would look at it and say, I don't know what you're talking about, will start to irritate you. And then you wind up spending kind of the second tier, which is the botter filters. And then a few things like not as much contrast as you might expect, or possibly some reflections or something will lead you to want to buy Astrodon filters. Which are through the roof as far as what they cost. But the point here is if somebody actually is a beginner at this and you don't want to invest a lot of money in it, you can get something that you'll be pleased with. You know, you just have to ignore a few little, you know, reflections or something like that for not a heck of a lot of money, especially compared to the exorbitant cost of those tri-band and dual band, so-called narrowband filters for color cameras. That is one thing I would say about this. The amount of money that they want for the tri-band filters in particular is so much that you're probably better off buying a monochrome camera to go with your color camera, because the monochrome camera is going to be cheaper than the filter. So it's something to be considered. All right, and this one is just some random. This is the Wizard Nebula. Again, this was slightly better filters. This was Botter. It was taken in 2018. But again, a monochrome image. And let's see, I got to move the zoom thing here. This is another example of bicolor emission nebula. This is the rosette in Orion, or I guess this is probably not technically correct. I think it's in Monoceros, isn't it, Chris?
I don't see which one. Yeah.
I don't know. I can't
That's
remember.
in Monsters. Yes, it is.
But anyway, this is what you can do with just a hydrogen alpha and an oxygen. This again is a very bright target. And now that Orion is up before dawn, for those that are serious night owls, they could start collecting data on this. But of course, it'll become more and more prominent and move to the evening as the year stretches on. And again, this is an HOO. And then, sorry, I have to move the zoom thing. And then an example of one that you see a lot. This is obviously LRGB. If you were to, I wish I could find, I was looking for this during the meeting. I actually have this as a hydrogen alpha narrowband. And it was kind of illustrative because everything disappears except the flame nebula. And it would have been a pretty good illustration of the difference between LRGB and color. But part of this is actually an emission nebula, which is the flame nebula right here. Well, that's all I've got. Does anybody have questions?
Now, I get this comment, the Astrodon 5 nanometer filters are about $400 a piece.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the make the 5 nanometer, and that's inch and a quarter.
And the three nanometer, you can jack that up by, what is it now, about double?
6 millimeter 3 nanometer filters are $750 a piece.
Yep. I was tempted. I was very tempted to get one of the full frame cameras from ZWO, but I added it all up, and the Astrodon filters that I would need for that, the whole package would run me about $8,000. So I kind of thought better of that.
That's because you needed 2-inch filters for that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's $1,500 each, I think.
My God.
Oh yeah, it's really expensive. Now, like I said, though, kind of the point of what I was showing for somebody that really is a beginner is that you can get something that you probably are going to be pretty pleased with, I don't know, what is a ZWO filter now, Steve? It's probably, $160.
Yeah, but they're like, I think they're 7 nanometers, something like that.
Right, they're much wider, so you got to have more time in the sky. So, and that is actually a point, especially Doug, if you're getting into this. Like everything else, it doesn't get what you pay for. And so if you're talking about 7 nanometer filters, then roughly speaking, the difference between a 3 nanometer filter and a 7 nanometer filter, at least with hydrogen alpha, is you will need double the number of hours to get the same signal to noise ratio.
No.
I just gotta get to figure out how Medicare can pay for that. I'll be good.
Good luck with that. Let me know how that works out for you.
I will, from jail.
By the way, one other thing, Doug, you mentioned, this is not related to narrowband imaging, but you mentioned something about LED street lights. Do you live in Cary or Raleigh?
Cary. I have a nice bright one at the end of my cul-de-sac.
You might want to check into this. City of Raleigh was getting so much static about LED lights when they put them in. They promised to fix any LED street lights that were bothering people, at least, presumably if it's, within eyesight of your front yard or whatever.
Oh yeah.
In my case, it was, you get onto Raleigh Click Fix, but I would think Cary has something kind of similar.
Oh yeah.
Whatever. And in my case, they were out there within about a week, I guess, and put shutters in the LEDs, so you can't actually see the glare from the LED. Yeah, there's still obviously a spotlight of light on the street, but It made a dramatic difference, and they did it.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, no, I mean they put when they install the LED light, I mean it's just like blasting my house. Literally, I put my truck at the end of the driveway, open up the tonneau, and I'm actually observing in the shadow.
I would say that you probably, I mean, like I said, I don't know what the procedures are for Carrie for complaining about this, but especially if the LED street light lights up the windows of your house, then
I can show you images that I've taken in my hallway of the light shining through my, like a central glass fixture, literally casting a shadow. And now we're just talking about harsh light flooding right now.
This would be my impression, at least from the standpoint of Raleigh. You don't even have to explain your particular hobby interests.
Yeah, okay, good.
Because if it is lighting up your windows,
yeah,
I think they would get that interferes with your sleep.
Yeah,
they should do something about it. And again, the one that's right outside my front door was really obnoxious. I would not have been able to continue observing or taking data from my front yard, but they did come out and put shutters on it, so it's much more tolerable.
All right.
The ZWO filter set, narrowband filter set for 1.25 inch filters is for 3 filters, $369.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's not too bad.
Well, the second generation, the first ones were kind of not so great, but from what I understand, the second generations are dramatically better.
These are the new ones. These are the second generation ones. Yep. So that's a good place to start.
I guess what I'd say if I had to quantitate this is the difference between the ZWO filters and the Astrodons is the Astrodons are 100% and the ZWOs are about 70%. I don't know, maybe 50%, but something like that. And you can overcome the rather large premium by putting more time in the sky. Nothing beats darkness and data.
Yeah.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah, what's up?
I've got one from the alternate perspective.
Well, please do. Yeah, go for it.
All right, let me see if I can share this screen. Okay, can you guys see that?
Nope.
Not yet.
Oh, wait a minute. Let me hit the right button.
There you go.
All right. I use narrowband filters on a color camera, but I use the Optilong LE Enhance. And so, I take the lazy way out, and, I can't really do the hours upon hours upon hours kind of thing that you guys are mostly talking about. So what I do is I use, a 4-inch f5 refractor, an ASI 294 color camera, and this LE Enhanced filter, which is HA and O3. And then you combine that, you just run it together as one exposure. And in this case, this is the crescent, and this is 1 hour's worth of time. And, I think you get really nice results without having to spend, an awful lot of time on them. Mm-hmm. And now I cheated a little bit on this one. This is 1 hour's worth of narrowband, but then it's 10 minutes worth of broadband to get correct color stars. And so I blended those two pictures together. But, without the Optilong filters, or, I got this one for my birthday, but they were around a little over $200. So you're not spending that's for a 2-inch. And so you're not spending a real, a lot of money, but, this was taken from my driveway in Cary, and it's, it's pleasing to my eye.
Yeah, there's now the L Extreme as well, which is a little more expensive, but also does a very good job.
Yeah, that came out after I already had mine, and to me, it didn't make sense to.
Yeah, the L is $309.
Yeah. But I've imaged quite a few, narrowband type targets, and without spending, a tremendous amount of time. This is 20 by 3 minutes, so this is 60 minutes. So you can get narrowband without going through the mono 3 different filter route, if you want.
When did you get this filter, Mark?
I got it in June last year. This was the very first narrowband picture I ever took.
Wow. How's it feel?
It feels really good.
because I don't know how long it would take to get that with LRGB, but I bet it would be a while.
Yeah, and I don't know how well it comes over on Zoom, but there's lots of little red nebulosity floating around all over the picture.
It looks good. It looks good. You can see it.
But there's, there's an alternative to the other way. I'm going to stop the share unless somebody else has questions.
No. Okay. Anybody else? Anything else to show?
Got one I'll show. It's not
Okay.
related to narrowband, other than I don't do narrowband yet. I'm still trying to decide what route I want to go with that.
Okay.
I'll just show one because I spent a long time on it. Let's see which screen I want to show here. It's just whole Andromeda again. But I was trying to get sort of the one that I could hang on the wall using the DSLR. And so this was 6 hours with my Canon 5D and a 70mm f5 up in Smith Mountain Lake, Virginia, where I'm taking most of my broadband stuff now. But what I'm missing there is a hydrogen alpha. So could I go back someday with a similar sensor and just take hydrogen alpha and add it to this boat? I don't see why I couldn't.
Yes.
Yeah, you could do that.
And it doesn't even have to be that similar a sensor, although rather obviously you would want to cover the entire galaxy. But if you're using PixInsight, it has scale transformations built into the registration routine.
Okay.
So if you were to take, let's say you get a dedicated astronomy camera, a cooled one or whatever, that has a similar field of view. There's some limits to how much scale transformation it'll do, but you're probably familiar with the so-called image scale parameter.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know what it is for this. I guess with a DSLR, it's probably maybe 2 or 3 arc seconds per pixel.
Yeah, I think it's 3 something. Yeah.
Oh, say again?
I think it's 3 something.
Well, like I said, most dedicated astronomy cameras on your average scope, you're going to wind up dropping down to like 1.5 or less. That's okay. It won't matter. You dump all of those subs into PixInsight and register them with the star alignment routine, and it'll do scale transformations, and you won't even know that they're taken with different cameras.
Okay, cool. Very good. Thanks.
If you look up M31 with hydrogen alpha on the internet, you see all kinds of really interesting possibilities.
It really helps bring out the spiral structure, so I'm hoping to do that someday.
Yeah, and there's a lot of gas and things like that. If you take a wider view of Andromeda, there's all kinds of H alpha gas around in that. It's not in the galaxy, but in our galaxy around it.
Yeah.
Interesting to see those.
Interstellar or intragalactic cirrus, or I've seen some images of that with that faint hydrogen alpha floating around.
Yeah.
So here, I actually, Jim, can I show something?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going through hard drive here. Let's see. What is going on? Actually, never mind. My computer is struggling here, and I don't need to listen to you. So, okay. So one of the, I guess that's it. Does anybody have anything else to show?
Nope.
Anything non-narrowband? Anybody else wants to show?
I've got nothing.
Okay.
Nope.
So one of the things that I just wanted to, I don't know, just show what everybody's rig is capable of doing, or not necessarily to what is it? Show who's got better technique or whatever. But one of the things that I was thinking about that we could do is possibly, what do you call it? Get everybody together and go after one target, like maybe once a quarter. So like, okay, everybody, it's prime time now, like we have right here, Jim, for the Andromeda galaxy. Why don't we all go out and take an image of it, and then in January we just go over and see what everybody has come up with. So I thought that would be something fun that we could all do together right there.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm interested in seeing like different techniques that people use both in capturing and processing. That could be pretty interesting.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like, I mean, like Fulbright, I mean, he tinkers with just about everything, and I mean, he could probably show us how he took a picture that's cost somebody about $2,000 to make with, you know, $200 worth of equipment. You know? So I mean, so I mean, that's basically what I'd like to do, is just to see if see about getting everybody on board, and we would just go and go after one target together, and then like at a given meeting, we'd like just go over and show what we came up with. So, anyways, well, other than that, do what?
I have a comment about this.
What's up?
What I would suggest that you do, if you want to like pick a target for like once a quarter, is to put some note on the RAC website that says this is what the target is going to be for the fourth quarter of 2021. And, you know, it kind of depends on the person that's doing it, but if you actually give the coordinates of the object, that a lot of people would actually key into their programs to center on, with presumably plate solving, then you've got a pretty good chance of everybody centering the object. And well, what that does is it allows you potentially to put everybody's data into a central repository and combine all of it.
Yeah, I was thinking about something like that too, and I'm just like, oh, God, that sounds so complicated.
No, not really. I mean, if you just tell, okay, so I guess if you're talking about something like M31 Andromeda, you don't really need to do that from the standpoint of the coordinates, because, you know, it's kind of obvious what the center of the object is. But if you're talking about some of these nebula fields, like the butterfly in Cygnus or something like that, it's not absolutely clear what to frame, I guess is what I'm getting.
I see what you're saying. Okay. All right. That makes sense.
So, Chris, why don't you, when you do that, why don't you let Anna know about that, and maybe she could come up with something splashy that she could put up on our Facebook site, and then that would kind of advertise it to, and just try to advertise it to the club, and say, hey, you might get a lot more people interested in doing imaging. Mm-hmm. And and drive a few more folks that way. So I mean, our page reach has actually grown by a couple orders of magnitude over the last year. So it's not a lot. We're not like getting millions of people, but we went from like tens of people to now thousands of people. So you might just ask, once you decide what you want to do, just say, hey, Anna, here's what we're thinking about. Can you come up with something that's splashy to put up on the Facebook page? And she's pretty good about doing that, and that also gets out to the SSAs and stuff like that. So,
Question.
Oh, solar system ambassadors. Oops. Okay. All right. I got you.
Isn't the imaging group? The participants. Don't you have to be a club member? And it's not even run on Facebook. So would you be excluding that audience anyway?
You would be, but it does maybe not Facebook, but maybe what we could do is then just kind of push that out to the club. Maybe if we had like a splash or something like that was maybe you put it in your photo account, and then we could push it out, and advertise it in the club. You're right. The outside groups can't get into the imaging group, so
yeah, but there's some results here. Guys, if you actually, I think if this is the case, everybody can get to the Raleigh Astronomy Club page, and because I've looked before without having to sign in or anything, and it just said, okay, there's a club calendar.
Yeah,
that might be one place to put it or something like that. The reason I'm saying that, rather than just sending out an email to the imaging listserv, I can guarantee you I will miss it.
Yeah.
There's quite a number of other people. They get very busy and it gets buried in
Yep,
the
me too.
Yeah.
just don't see it.
Yeah.
And that was the thought. That's the major thought.
That's a good thought. Yeah. But yeah. Well, then I would talk to Byron or I'm say Barton or Matt about that. And they could do that for you.
Okay, well, we'll get something like this off the ground, I hope.
No, I think it's a really cool challenge. I mean, I think you could generate interest within the club, and get more people, excited about imaging and everything.
Very good. Yeah, I mean,
I think they are. Let me just say this: I think they are excited about imaging. They just, I don't know. It's the same way with our meetings. We can't really seem for whatever. It's like standing in a cash booth trying to grab dollars out of the air. You just can't. We can't seem to grab enough people in, especially with these virtual meetings.
It's like you can't get a read on these people if they are want to do something like this or not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I guess that's all I have. Of course, what I always ask at every meeting, if you guys have a topic, or if anybody wants to present a topic, please let me know, because we are out of topics for the rest of the year. And I'll just post to the group, and we'll talk about things. And yeah, I guess we'll get a look at that doing a quarterly object shootout. Here we go. I like the way that sounds. Sounds really good. Okay. Well, I guess that's it. Good night, everybody.
Yep.
Hi, guys.
Good night.
See you later.
Great meeting.
It does.
Good meeting. See you. Bye.
Thanks, Chris.
You're welcome.